Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande.
Aspexia Rugaton is permitting herself to stay awake too long in her vast bed of Asmodean grandeur, thinking about how much she doesn't like all this, instead of just ordering her own mind sharply to behave. She also has an instinct that it will be dangerous to order her own mind to stop thinking about this. She really doesn't like the moratorium on maledictions. Aspexia sees the rationalization. She sees the excuse. Pushing Cheliax in the direction of some cheap goodness will assist in the spread of Sever's legend and cult and her eventual ascension, which, yes, serves Sever more than hell. But Sever no longer lawfully answers to Rugaton about that. Only Despater can bid her otherwise. Swearing off maledictions is undeniably an efficient way of producing a public shift in the perception of Cheliax under the Severian Empire. It gets them to maybe consider that Cheliax might be starting over, that Carissa Sevar is on their side, to want that to be true. It lets people hope. Just like Aspexia Rugaton is being allowed to hope herself that their hope is a lie. And Aspexia Rugaton realizes then why she is afraid. If Aspexia's wavering grasp of tropes is at all correct, then neither of those obvious hopes can be realized in the form that they are hoped. Not Aspexia's own hope that Sevar remains aligned to Hell's interests, nor the hopes of good people everywhere in Golarion that Sevar has brought Cheliax's evil to heel. So the hope can't be real, nor can it be a lie, either one. And that's a contradiction, which means that the whole appearance of Carissa Sever playing a game for her overlordship and divinity, serving or betraying Hell to that end, with Cheliax as her playing piece, this is also not reality. Aspexia Rugaton murmurs to herself, and even as she says it, she knows deep down that this is so. But she is not an Ilani, and she does not know what to do after she says that.
The part that isn't real is in its own way very straightforward, and the mask over it is being done correctly such that the only way to guess it would be on pure priors. If you looked at that complicated situation developing around Cheliax and trusted your lying eyes, you would get the impression that Carissa Sever was playing a close and clever and complicated game, concealing her real intentions from at least your side and possibly all the sides, setting in motion some very long-term strategies spanning a timescale of months, maybe even years. You would think you had that much time to think, that much time to plan. Anyone who made that mistake and took their leisure would have no chance to act at all before the endgame began. And then it begins. Turn now to regard the city of Absalom, in this age called also the City of Lost Omens, on the southeast coast of the Isle of Kortos, where the Starstone was raised up from the sea and closed up in the impenetrable magical fortress of the Starstone Cathedral, of which it is said that the Algolthus called down a poisonous remnant of an unborn world, meant to strike upon the rival human civilization of Aslant. The ancient moon goddess Akavna moved Golarion's moon into position to intercept the missile, but instead the missile shattered into thousands of pieces while continuing toward Golarion, and the missile's fragments pierced Akavna and killed her. And then her brother Amaznan, god of knowledge and magic, sacrificed himself to neutralize the Algolthu magic upon those fragments and prevent them from destroying all Golarion. And the fragment now called Starstone fell into the sea. And eventually Aroden found that fragment, and it turned him and several other people into gods.
Golarion?
Yes, Dathilan?
There are elements of this story that make less than total sense to someone isekai'd in from a physicalist civilization, trying to visualize out the entire process, step by step. Actually, no, that's understating the case. If something that strange was written in Dathilan, it would be inside a children's book, and you would realize that the real answer was meant to be sought out by young adults when you were old enough to notice problems with what had been claimed by the children's book in your bedroom. The children's books of Dathilan are not visibly author-signed, and never attested to by any specific grown-up, nor gifted to you by specific adults. They're just there in your bedroom when you grow up. And if you ask your parents, they'll truthfully tell you that they didn't put the books there, and your parents never speak to you of anything that you read in a children's book, for those are children's books, and only children speak of them to each other. As the saying goes in Dathilan, trying to raise a child on only true books is like trying to train a statistical classifier on only positive examples. And furthermore, as is so obvious as to hardly need stating after the original proverb, having all the true books be written in a non-fiction voice, while all the untrue books are written in a fiction voice, would be introducing an oversimplified hyperplanar separator that would prevent a simple statistical algorithm from learning subtler features.
That's not how things are done in Golarion.
Indeed, but someone who did grow up in Dathilan sure will notice when the Starstone book story sounds very, very odd.
So what's wrong with the standard story?
It's hard to decide where to start, but one has to start somewhere, so start with the notion that the remnant of an unborn world, having shattered upon contact with Golarion's moon, which a god had moved into position for interception, was not thereby successfully deflected. Things that hit a moon hard and break into fragments don't usually stay on the same trajectory after that, narrowly enough to hit a planet. The width of Golarion in its moon's sky is only 0.01% of that sky's angular area. You cannot randomly hit a planet, starting from a moon, if the course is at all perturbed. This story requires the Starstone to be strong enough to blow through the moon, trajectory unperturbed, while shattering into 1,000 pieces along the way. One would also normally think a space missile could be deflected more easily than by moving a moon to intercept it, even if some goddess has an especially easy time moving around moons. If a ballistic space missile is coming from far enough away that you have time to move a moon into place for interception, at any reasonable speed a moon should attain, you could apply a much lighter deflection earlier in that missile's trajectory. Isekai protagonists from Science Worlds likewise know what happens when planets fail to be born. You end up with asteroids. They aren't especially poisonous. Then there's the notion that a Kavna waited around in place near the missile collision site or missile exit site to be hit by fragments large enough or fast enough to kill a goddess, which she didn't see coming and dodge. Again, as science protagonists know, when you are dealing with moving moons around and distances on the scale of planets, it is really hard for anything to hit anything by accident. Possibly there was an original missile approaching at near light speed, and when it collided with the moon, that sprayed up so many massive fragments that 0.01% of them hitting Golarion would still have ended life on the surface. But that doesn't square with Amazna needing to sacrifice himself to neutralize magic on those fragments. If secondary ejector had been the primary threat to Golarion, they'd have been an unmagical threat. You'd furthermore think that the Algolthus, if they were able to steer such a hypothetical hyperkinetic missile at all, would have known a missile at that energy would utterly destroy Golarion's crust, including themselves, if not intercepted. Also, if the Algolthu magic upon the fragments was potent enough to lay Golarion waste in its own right, apart from the fragment's kinetic energy, and required Amaznan's self-sacrifice to neutralize, then why should the Algolthus not lay that lethal magic directly about Aslant? Why put it on a distant, incoming asteroid first? And furthermore, though this is not a physicalist area of expertise, it comes up if you just visualize out events and think about them. Supposedly, a Kavna's divinity stuck to those fragments that killed her, one of which was the Starstone, which then reached Golarion and became individually able to create gods on the order of Aradin. Erodin was the strongest of mortal ascended gods. Hitting a Kavna should not create thousands of fragments, all of which could then create Erodins. Arguendo, possibly all of a Kavna's divinity stuck to the Starstone and not to any other fragments that killed her. Maybe it was that exact fragment that struck the final blow. Counter arguendo, maybe, but then that's another weight of burdensome improbability required to make the whole story work. One also notes, as an isekai protagonist reading through other stories of gods' deaths, that it is not usually said that the weapon that kills them retains their divinity. Also, if either of Amaznan or a Kavna did willingly sacrifice themselves to meliorate the blow, why did they do that? To briefly extend the lives of those mortals living upon one planet until they came to Pharasma slightly later. It's a strange trade for an ancient god to make, and Amaznan and a Kavna are said to have been lawful neutral and chaotic neutral respectively. Neither good.
Anything else?
Oh, all kinds of things. If Dathilan were to list out everything unusual, whether or not the improbability is obviously relevant. For example, it's said that Iomedae's helmet melted during her ascension, but remained intact enough to become a major artifact, the Thorn Crown of Iomedae. There's no artifacts like that said to be tied to Nethys's or Irori's ascension. This doesn't obviously tie into any other anomalies, and doesn't seem intuitively shocking given the basic premise that the Starstone ascends things that get physically close to it, and Dathilan is not actually going anywhere with this observation. But if you're trying to actually think about a puzzle, you will write everything like this down in one place. If Dathilan forced itself to make up a guess about this random, possibly anomalous fact, something Starstone treats divinity in a way that makes spatial proximity matter to an unusual degree. Any real scientific puzzle will contain a large number of extra pieces, and in advance of the solution, you don't know which pieces are extra.
So what does Dathilan think actually happened?
Lacking direct observation, you would probably have too many hypotheses and too little evidence to narrow them down. You might speculate that the currently known Starstone was the whole original poisonous remnant, rather than just a fragment. If there were fragments, they might have been from pieces of moon, blown outward along a similar trajectory after the original Starstone blasted straight through the moon at high velocity. You could theorize that the Starstone was aimed from the beginning to pierce through Galarian's moon toward Galarian, rather than a Kavna moving the moon into place and in futile error, and that the Starstone killed a Kavna through her connection to that moon. Possibly, a Maznan tried to save his sister deity, and the Starstone sucked the power out of him and killed him too.
This hardly seems certain.
Yes, it's admitted speculation, but it's often wise to start by trying to develop any consistent speculative model at all, if you're trained and confident in your own ability to throw out any pieces or holes in which you later spot a problem.
Well, keep speculating then.
Maybe the Algolthus tried to catalyze the Starstone's poison with their magic, rather than having the power to create a weapon like that from scratch. Or maybe the Algolthus had nothing to do with the entire matter, and were only blamed afterwards. Or maybe it wasn't the whole Algolthu civilization, but a particular band of Algolthu mages influenced by Rovagug, like how Rovagug is said to have infected a Sarenraite city built far above the Dead Vault.
Why blame Rovagug?
Abadar was taken by surprise at how the Age of Darkness ended Zonkuthan's exile, so some prophecy-breaking force was involved at some point. And if a Maznin and a Kavna did willingly sacrifice themselves, maybe it wasn't to save mortal lives. Maybe it had more to do with Golarion being Rovagug's cage. That in turn suggests that an unmeliorated Starstone strike would have benefited Rovagug, or that the gods feared it would. Maybe the missile was accidentally aimed at the Dead Vault. But the main point is just that the thing that is written in most books can't possibly be the true story. And that's obvious as soon as you try to visualize the process step by step. And you might also suspect, if what was written in books seemed obviously wrong, that there was some reason the real answer was hidden. Though the general state of disrepair in Golarian epistemology, from the standpoint of the Isekai physicalist, is such that even this guess is very tentative. The myth composers could just be that invalid. But still, you'll go looking for truths that are not only overlooked, but concealed within the Starstone, faced with a story like that.
It begins in the City of Lost Omens with a casting of the spell Mage's Decree, by which a wizard can make themselves heard for miles around, all through a city.
This is Ione Sala, Oracle of Nethys, apprentice to Nefreti Klepati. Stand by for extremely urgent instructions in 3 hours. Prepare to convey or translate those immediately.
A lot of predictable ruckus follows. Those who didn't understand the original words in the language there named Taldan, called also Common and Absalom, shout for translations. People who've lived their life well enough to stay ignorant of wild rumors are even more confused and inquire after context. Many wise and proactive people will panic early to avoid any later rush, and start heading away from the Starstone since earlier rumor held that's where shit would go down. Certain others, however...
That's illegal. 80,000 pounds in fines. She can bargain it down if she talks to the Primarch, says Castra Eliamole instantly. The nice thing about violations of this specific city statute is that you can't really contest that they happened. Guilty parties can of course teleport out, but it's the rare high-level wizard who will accept being permanently blacklisted from Absalom shops and libraries and mage academies.
The nice thing about this specific violation is that the wizard even named themselves. unless they are naming their ex-girlfriend to get her in trouble, which is the sort of thing wizards frequently come up with, thinking themselves cleverer than they are.
Do you suppose it's true, though, says Message Espexon, her secretary, who has cooperatively gotten out the paperwork to be delivered to Sala issuing the fine and explaining how she can contest it, and is now filling it out with today's date, the time, the investigating authority, the statute violated, and the source of the information by which Sala was identified as a suspect. Testimony to all, Absalom.
Don't be ridiculous.
I mean, there's the prophecy, right? And Ione Salas, that Chelish Nathajan. She might know if the prophecy's true and the city to be devoured.
You can't trust a Chelish person, and you can't trust a Nathajan, says Castra, with absolute surety. So any sound a Chelish Nathajan makes is just so much wind whistling through the streets, and we're going to fine her for it.
Well, at minimum, says Mezich, I think we've got to think of who's delivering the notice, if she's in a fighting mood, considering that you can't trust Chelish Nathesians.
That is a complication. Castra bites the end of her pen.
The Office of the Public Interest, which handles the frequent and often impressive misconduct gotten up to by the high-level adventurers of Absalom, anything not appropriately handled by the City Watch, and the option of dumping some idiot in the drunk tank or the jail is the province of the first spell lord of Absalom, who is responsible for regulating the Arcana Miriam and ultimately all spells cast within the city. However, the position of First Spell Lord is currently held by Lord Gear of House Gix, the Primarch of Absalom, who's not in fact a caster but assigned himself that position anyways. He's not in Absalom right this second. The next most obvious person to storm in, given the implied threat to Absalom, is the second Spell Lord charged with Absalom's magical defense, Lady Darchana of House Madanani, who also happens to be Archdean of the Arcana Miriam, though at 7th Circle she's not actually the most powerful arcanist there. But Lady Darchana has long been on fragile terms with Primarch Gear, both as his obvious rival for the true mastery of Absalom, and also about the snub of her not being named First Spell Lord.
Message finishes the paperwork. Darchana, he asks quietly.
No, we can't, says Castra. Gear will rightly consider that entirely inappropriate, and think she might declare that this represents a real threat to the city, which she of course will vanquish in his absence.
Then you've got to contact him.
I am doing that. Castra is applying his seal to her incident report at this very moment. Gear resents, and is usually shielded against sendings, but he has some astoundingly fast carrier pigeons. He'll hear of the problem in plenty of time.
I should really do something, says the Lady Darchana, contemplatively, to her familiar, a specialty pug named Tiffany. Why, the girl implies a threat to the whole city exists, and I can't imagine the Primarch competent to handle it alone.
And yet, Tiffany says, one imagines he will hesitate to ask the Arcana Miriam for the help he so obviously requires of it.
Well, he's going to have to bestir himself to request our aid sooner rather than later. She fixes her hat in her reflection in her bedroom window. Through it there's a courtyard visible. The wizards of the Arcana Miriam are, well, teleporting. Out. It's not that they won't come to Absalom's defense if necessary, but one can come to Absalom's defense just as well from several hundred miles away. And, well, there is the prophecy. And even if one puts no store in the prophecy, there are panicked people who do and will suddenly pay very well for a ride out. I heard is out of town.
He has that house in the country, Tiffany agrees cheerfully.
I think it speaks very poorly of him that he didn't delegate the defense of the city to me in his absence, in light of recent events. A servant timidly sticks her head around a corner. Yes, says the lady graciously.
My lady, are we leaving?
Us? Why no. The Primarch may leave the city to incompetence while he vacations in the country, but the Arcana Miriam remembers its duties and doesn't fear them. Why, I'm going to go apprehend that troublemaking Sala myself as soon as the Primarch asks it of me. There's a demiplane we evacuate to in the case of threats to the city, with an access point under the wine cellars. You can get your family, if you'd like, so long as it's clear you're being very silly, and that I'm not perturbed in the slightest.
Yes, my lady.
And so long as you are sure to repeat everything you overheard about the Primarch.
Yes, my lady.
Castra presses her paperwork on the process server for public interest once the carrier pigeon has taken wing. Do go and serve her notice at once, if she's still in the city. I've raised the fine to £300,000. on the grounds that she caused mass panic and probably dozens of deaths of trampling down by the docks.
You can take the Asmodeanism out of them, but not the evil, Message says gravely.
He shouldn't be said it in front of the notice server, who is blinking very rapidly now. She's not a murderer, Castra says impatiently. She's not even a renowned adventurer. She's a self-important vandal with 1/6 circle scroll. A dime a dozen, really. By the time the Primarch sees her shell be very apologetic, I don't doubt, and in any event, all you've got to do is serve the notice.
Ione Sala can be located readily enough, if Office of Public Interest has magic that can do that, or if they correctly guess Iona Sala would be near the Ascendant Court and ask around if anyone's seen her. The young woman in question can be found grimly vanishing away whole bookshelves of books from a library in Iomede's temple in the Ascendant Court near the Starstone Cathedral. Ione Sala reads neutral good, and she's sworn an oath to Nethys to give back all the books that she's now taking into her protection. Acolytes are rushing about her, in the way of people who are trying to get everything valuable out of a temple. Priests and paladins are nowhere to be seen. Ione Sala will accept the fine notice without blinking, fish a correspondingly large diamond out of her pocket, hand it over, and tell this minor functionary that she's extremely busy, and he needs to get out of everyone's way now.
He departs as rapidly as possible, thinking uncomplimentary but not false things about wizards, Nethesians, and Chelish people, desperately trying not to lose the diamond or be observably in possession of the diamond.
I think we ought to give due consideration to the theory this has something to do with the prophecy, Afsul Calaris says, in the emergency meeting convened to discuss Ione Sala's actions.
I was worried someone was going to waste our time with that, Japata Eris, his immediate superior says. Of course it's related. Sala made it up for attention a while ago and is escalating now. But the first wasn't true prophecy, which every schoolchild knows is broken, and the new one isn't either.
It could still be, you know, not prophecy, prediction.
But why, I ask, didn't you say prediction? Because it doesn't sound as dramatic as prophecy. Ione Sala predicted and then caused panic and mass death in our city. That's the problem we're facing, and if it were up to me, she'd hang for it 4 or 5 times.
The thing I was trying to say was, maybe she knows of, I don't know, some unsealed ancient horror.
If she knew anything real and were actually interested in helping us prevent it, she'd tell us what she knew. She's an adversary. She doesn't care about this city. Nothing she says is trustworthy. Nothing she claims merits consideration. Japata's tone is one of finality. The thing killing people out there isn't prophecy. It's panic. We need to get the city guard into the streets, impose a curfew, keep people home, or we'll have another trampling incident worse than the steer track races.
With all due respect, a man objects from across the room, you're not going to like desertion rates if you order the guard to their posts right now.
What's your suggestion? I overlook the desertion and hope they sheepishly return to their posts tomorrow and let the people trample each other into the bloody mud.
No, but you've got to reassure them first. People need to know that we looked into Sala's claims and there's nothing to worry about. We need to get our own counter-message out there, telling people that we've stepped up monitoring of threats to the city and there are no signs of any problems.
Oh, are there not? Someone else interjects, relieved.
Well, I haven't heard of any, and I'm sure it'd have been shouted to the rooftops if there were.
You can't ask the guard to go back to their posts while they're terrified for the lives of their loved ones. You've got to assure them that there's nothing to worry about.
Yes, Japata snaps. Someone already said that. I'm working on it. A message to all City Watch. The rumors have been examined. They are false. There are no risks to the city. No one in city leadership is departing.
Departing is dangerous, offers Afsul, reorienting to the new priorities. The ships might be sunk. Sala might be feeding people into the mouths of pirates.
Excellent, yes, Japata agrees. Departing puts your family in grave danger. What's safe is keeping them home. Sala's claims have been decisively refuted. Yes?
Yes, everyone agrees.
The best way for the populace to be safe from the panic is to remain in their homes. We'll send more of the city guard to the Ascendant Court.
I'd say it's the docks district that needs them, offers somebody who is not at all suspicious and is totally supposed to be inside this room. Some people are fleeing the Ascendant Court, but that's their own foolishness, and it'd serve them right to return and find their homes robbed. It's the docks where there's fighting that might spread. It takes them half an hour to draft and authorize an announcement using Mage's decree to counter Sala's absurd misbehavior and assure the people of the city that all is well. Most of that time is spent quibbling over wording. They don't get many words, and a number of people want a say in what they are. By then, the city guard has been largely deployed to the docks to manage the masses of people desperately trying to board boats. The rumors that are flying assert that everything from Zon-Kutan to returning Eridan will be showing up, or maybe that the island will be swallowed into hell. But that's not to say that it's too late for the announcement. There are many homes whose residents are bitterly fighting over whether to flee or to stay. Many people trying to persuade an entrenched relative or agonizing over whether to spend their entire fortune on a teleport. Many people nervously peeking out into the streets and taking the temperature of things. Many people who want to hear from their city government and know what they should do. The statement eventually agreed upon is, remain in your homes. Sala's claims have been examined and disproven. No danger exists. All deaths have come from panic. Protect your families. Stay home. The minute it is approved, it is passed on to a wizard who was able to prepare the mage's decree spell in the last half hour.
As the wizard is in the middle of casting, his spell is disrupted by a pineapple pie being smushed into his face.
The Arcanamirium has a higher percentage of fifth circle and above wizards of any wizarding school on the face of Galarian, but that's still only around 10%. With all of them out selling teleports or fleeing the country, it barely feels less crowded. No one has dared ask the Lady Darchana what she plans, but people are hovering lest she happen to say it offhandedly. She's not an idiot. Nethys is playing at something, and Nethys likes big explosions, so whatever Nethys is playing at is plausibly catastrophic. Warning everyone and then doing a big explosion would be in character. The assurances she's heard from the city government are meaningless. Of course, reacting strongly to warnings of catastrophe is a great way to be easy to manipulate, and to be on the wrong foot for catastrophes coming in from an unexpected direction.
My lady?
You fear that our deaths are coming and want me to order an evacuation, but are perfectly aware it is as likely as not to serve our enemies. She responds without even looking who spoke. You can stop asking. I don't know what I'll do, but none of you have useful input.
Pineda's been spotted, interfering with the city in their efforts to reduce panic and get everyone to stay home.
The whole nation of Cheliax should have long since been burned off the face of this benighted world, Lady Darchana says with feeling.
Does that mean we're not evacuating, since they want us to?
Would you shut up?
She is surprised and dismayed and even disappointed when her priests in her temple in Absalom ask her for guidance about the Nethesian demanding that the temple be evacuated. She makes the obvious inferences. Some persons adjacent to Keltham, and maybe Keltham himself, are going to go for the Starstone. This is good news, because the Starstone isn't Rovagug. It's bad news in that the Starstone also is not Keltham goes to Lastwall, and meets people whose convictions are like his, but have settled around them into a shape humans can endure, and in that Keltham is reasonably likely to die attempting this. She alone would not be capable of saving him, even if she would, nor does it seem likely that Caden would be sufficient, but perhaps she's underestimating him, or underestimating Keltham. She has seen Keltham in vision. Whatever Keltham is doing here, he expects it to succeed despite all obstacles that he knows about. It may still be hugely ill-advised, or worse, intelligently contrary to her purposes. But her fragment's guess is that Keltham's purpose is unlikely to be worth expending her very scarce resources to prevent. She tells her people to evacuate civilians, since they've gone and conveniently made this a single bit of information to transmit to them, and they can probably save enough lives to make it worth it. And she pays the situation more attention and watches over it for a time. But in the end, she decides not to draw together enough of herself to participate in a fight when someone touches the Starstone.
And that's the last important decision that Iomede needed to prove she would make.
Iomede. Emergency situation that the fully informed fragment of you has been apprised about. This information is given to you under the condition that...
And so when the time for Ione's second set of instructions comes, Absalom's citizenry is braced for possible panic and significantly pre-fled, while having not really panicked yet in the way of people who are hoping for news, which isn't too bad.
The first time Ione Sala tries to cast again from a sixth circle wizard scroll, she cannot do it, for her fingers tremble, and the spell form is not unfolding well, and it takes all her dexterity to avoid wasting the scroll. This possibility has also been foreseen, by common sense more than by divine intervention. There are other scrolls to hand, money being of no object at all anymore, and Ione Sala casts a heroism upon herself before she continues. It's not ordinarily what you think of as an aid to casting from scroll, but it helps if you are frightened. And then Ione Sala speaks again. Mage War in 10 minutes. Enormous lethal radius around Starstone. Start running now. Avoid Mageworks. Dismiss outsiders. Don't go ethereal. Don't look back.
And then there's panic in the streets, at least among the sort of person who did not correctly foresee that they'd probably hear something roughly this alarming, update early on the evidence they'd predictably get later, and start moving away from the Starstone before the actual announcement was made. In fact, something like 4/5 of the people managed to make that update, got their valuables and their family, shared the news with friends who didn't speak Taldan, locked up their things, and evacuated with the genuinely cautious public order of people who don't want to look stupid if in fact nothing happens. And now there's panic in the streets, but those streets can mostly hold the least wise seventh of the local subpopulation running around screaming. Though even then you've got the 1 in 20 persons who are staying in place or maybe even heading off to try looting a home, because they're even less wise than that, or prouder, or just plain stupid.
Hi, Ione. It's Pilar Pineda. Sorry we had to hold the fight here, but everyone needs to run away now. Abscond. Flee. The voice cries that command flee in one language after another, with a blood-freezing cheery note that is impossible to ignore.
I, Carissa Sevar, wish to avoid deaths so numerous that the river of souls overflows and loses some forever. You can help by not being among them.
I'm Keltham. What you're about to see is a warning explosion 1,000th as powerful as the lesser forces to be unleashed here.
Starstone Cathedral, Earwain. 1 ton of fuel-air explosive ignites in the air over the Starstone Cathedral, creating an enormous crack and a vast billow of fire. There isn't actually any standard spell, even meteor shower, that creates an explosion quite that large. It looks like Ninth Circle wizards getting ready to fight. And there are still people so incredibly smart and skeptical that they'll stay around and try to loot a house or two, but not enough of them to overflow the River of Souls and get eaten by Astradaemons if they all die simultaneously, which is the part that matters. Others do pray to their gods about the affair, and divine attention now gathers toward Absalom. But there is no ancient god who decides to collect more of themselves and focus a truly vast attention on the Starstone Cathedral and surrounding planar spaces, while nothing has yet begun for real, and that is the only choice those gods make that ends up mattering. And then it begins.
He is about to cast a spell, from Scroll, that is considerably beyond what he ought to be able to cast, even at INT 29, and it is very important that this spell go off correctly. He draws on his familiar gloves of Use Magic device, now improved to +7 and specialized for scrolls. He casts from Scroll upon himself, Bestow Insight, Use Magic device. And he casts prayer upon himself, from a scroll bought of a demon lord's worshippers. And then, so fortified, he casts Greater Heroism. So fortified, casts Moment of Greatness, casts Moment of Prescience, and at the very last casts Wish.
In a different possibility that was foreseen, that Nethys had warned of, if things had gone according to plan, a Keltham acting with less time to prepare would have taken the shorter, surer route. Simply detonated a vast explosion above the Starstone Cathedral. Keltham would, in that vision of possibility, have directly wished antimatter into existence on that spot, in sufficient quantity that he could be reasonably sure that Erodin's Starstone protecting fortress would be blasted down on the first try. It would have been futile then to warn anybody but teleporters to flee Absalom imminently. The coastlines of nearby countries would have received that warning. What eventuates instead is a shiver in the air of Absalom, an anti-chill, a sudden heat that isn't tangible. Walls of force around Absalom, whether around a High Lord's palace or deep in a mage's tower, suddenly flare and shatter with shrieks of cracking magic. Continual flames flicker, and some go out. A dozen different kinds of specialized magic and magical items fail, and some of those explode. A third of the mage towers of Absalom are now in some distress. Many lesser magical watchers and guardians scream and clutch at their eyes, though there is nothing visible for mortals to see. And some greater magical guardians within the Ascendant Court are charred to glowing ash where they stood. But the real sight to see, if you are foolish enough to be looking back in that direction, is the Starstone Cathedral upon its formerly unreachable island, in the middle of a pit that nobody can cross except under their own power. All at once the walls and roofs of the cathedral, the pinnacles and minarets, flash into searing light, impossibly bright, as if the Starstone Cathedral stood beneath some alien sun that had exploded, though there is no explosion visible.
You obviously cannot just walk up to the Starstone by going through the ethereal plane, where it borders upon Golarian's portion of the prime material. Erodin has thought of that. An apprentice wizard would think of that. It follows, then, that the starstones containing installation must have defenses that extend into the ethereal. Guessably, most of that installation just extends into the ethereal directly. So detonating a 10-kiloton antimatter explosion on the ethereal plane instead of the prime material will perhaps destroy what guards the starstone and leave the material city standing, so you could hope.
The pinnacles and minarets are charred and charring as the first flash fades, but they stand.
He has, a very few moments earlier, cast his first and only wish from Scroll, to conjure a significant quantity of antimatter inside of a high-vacuum space. He did not use all that antimatter at once. Rather, that antimatter was divided up telekinetically and allocated to magical containers. There will be significant divine attention pointing to Absalom now, and while gods are large rather than fast, they are not reliably slow. So while he is not skipping directly to the most powerful explosion, he is not waiting 6 seconds between actions either. The first explosion was more of a test than anything else. The next ethereal detonation is equivalent in energy to 50,000 tons of high explosive.
A number of people who ignored Ione's emphatic instructions and looked back after the first flash now have eyes that are scarred by the light that reflected from nowhere, and some of those will not be able to afford third circle cleric healing. The Starstone Cathedral is in flames. It is wounded, but it has not fallen.
200 kilotons.
A wizard sobs and cradles in his arms the familiar who was burned over and over by some invisible force, feeling the last life depart upon some final unstoppable blow. The Starstone Cathedral now lies blasted, seemingly open, but one cannot enter into its heart yet, nor scry it. There's still twisted space and planar obstacles there. Some magic like that does not pose any bar at all to material forces passing through the ethereal, and therefore cannot be destroyed merely by non-magical explosions in the ethereal.
Of which, if you're familiar with a long built-up sequence of thought about Ilani weapons, there is an obvious sort of thing to try: set off an ethereal 20-kiloton explosion inside a jacket of raw spell silver. Magical forces are complicated, but some of them considered in isolation are simple. Accelerating spell silver sufficiently, as in to a significant fraction of light speed in less than a microsecond, will produce an intense pulse of a potent magical force that interacts with other magical forces. That is the adapted principle of an EMP bomb.
All spells interrupted in mid-casting fail, some explosively. Every magic item and permanent effect in Absalom makes a fortitude save against destruction, with DC proportional to inverse square distance from the hypocenter. The Arcana Miriam's evacuation demoplane is cast loose of its portal. Retrieving those teachers and students and servants and families will require over 500 plane shifts or multiple gates. A reclusive wizard who lived in his tower with his secluded family, shielded from hearing any mage's decrees until the first ethereal blast disrupted his mage works, was in the midst of evacuating his remaining family: a spouse, a 4-year-old daughter, a 2-year-old son. His teleport is disrupted just as it goes off, and they end up 40 miles off target downward, in the nearest liquid pocket inside that volume of Galarian's mantle. They die very quickly, and not all to the same afterlives. It could seriously have been a lot worse. In fact, it will shortly be worse. The way to the Starstone now lies open. One person teleports nearby and flies down and makes to touch that Starstone, whose surface is now glowing hot and lightly scarred but seems still wholly intact. No final trap stops that person. Perhaps all such traps are also ruined, or perhaps a rodent could not foresee whether anyone who'd gone to these lengths would be his foe or his friend. Then that person will touch the Starstone, a strange exultant smile upon her face as a vast flood of transfiguring, transcending energy flows into her unresisting soul, expanding it, beginning to transform her mind to a stranger and vaster and fragmented perspective.
Ashikek, Eowyn. And then she's gone. From a tear in space, moving almost too fast to see, impossibly fast for something so huge, comes forth a titanic nightmare of blood-red armor, whose thin, stalking legs are like tree trunks of polished chitin. Its eyes are volcanic fire. Its movements are as silent as the finest assassin, and complete within a fraction of a second. And the entity who dared to stretch out her hand toward divinity is slain, having become godlike enough that her death is final in body and soul.
So end all who survive Erodin's barriers meant to stop most aspirants from destroying themselves wholly, save that one paladin protected by Erodin himself after extensive god negotiation, or that lucky swashbuckler who only staggered into the cathedral on a dare, too drunk to understand godhood even as it came to him, or that thief who came into the cathedral intending to steal a piece of the Starstone, who touched it with a chisel held in gloves, and tried to the last to free himself as it activated. That was one path to getting past Akikik, if anyone was wondering, to never want nor intend the divinity you gained.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.